Meeting open and welcome everybody who is here. We have present Councillor Harvey, Alderman Barakis, Councillor Dutta and myself. Do we have any apologies, Mr Banks?
Councillor Coates, Chair.
Councillor Coates, thank you. And ably assisting me is Baby and Mr Eichen. I'd like firstly to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Muwinina people and recognise the determination and resilience of the Palawa people of Tasmania who have survived invasion and dispossession and who continue to maintain and strengthen their identity, culture and rights. I recognise the value of continuing Aboriginal knowledge and cultural practice and pay my respects to Elders past and present and any First Nations people watching tonight. Please, if you have your mobiles, please turn them to silent or off. Thank you very much. We've talked about apologies. There's nobody to co-opt. Confirmation of minutes. Councillor Dutta, thank you. Any discussion? No discussion. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. Consideration of supplementary items. I don't think we have any. Nope. Okay. Item 4 is indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. There being none, move to transfer of agenda items. Are there any transfers? No. Item 6, planning authority items, consideration of items with deputations. Lord Mayor. Alderman Barakis, was that a hand up?
Yep, sure.
Yep, okay. I hope it wasn't a rude gesture or anything.
Oh, no, sorry, I just sort of stuck my hand up.
Okay, all right. So I'll put that. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Item is carried, and welcome you, Lord Mayor. Can we have somebody co-opt the Lord Mayor? Alderman Barakis, thank you. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. So item 7, and we go to the first item, and we're acting as a planning authority, 7.1.1, which is 7 Kane Street, West Hobart. It's a change of use to visitor accommodation. I'll ask Ms Jane Edwards to come to the table, please. Come to the microphone if you wouldn't mind. Yes, or that central microphone there. Thanks, Jane. Thank you. So you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. I'll just change my glasses. I'm Jane Edwards, and my husband Drew Middleton and our 17-year-old daughter Gracie live at 152 Goulburn Street. It's an old church hall with parking in Kane Street, where we're welcomed as honorary residents of 21 years. Drew and I were surprised to note the response to the application being discussed tonight, considering 4 representations with compelling detail. Kane Street is effectively 2 tiny streets, and the bottom and top are accessed from different directions. The lower portion comprises 6 houses plus our car parking. 4 of these houses own more than 1 car, and parking can be difficult due to only 7 available spots. 4 of these are unlimited and keenly fought for by commuters early in the day. The tight configuration of our very narrow street necessitates garage and carport access at difficult angles and numerous yellow lines to assist such. There are constant violations of yellow lines as non-residents misunderstand or ignore markings, parking across our carports and driveways or on yellow lines opposite, blocking our access. It's required us to buy witches' hats for constant use, including weekends during sport matches on the school oval. Disturbingly, the street sees significantly increased traffic flow at the beginning and end of school days, as the rear gates of Goulburn Street Primary are at the top end of Lower Kane Street. Existing street planning necessitates that all wishing to park in Lower Kane Street enter from Goulburn, then having to make a 3-point turn at the school gates in order to park in the downhill spaces. This unavoidable turn is a disaster waiting to happen, and for this reason, 16 years ago, thank you Jeff Briscoe, we received council permission for a yellow line opposite our carport in order to exit facing downhill and avoiding the 3-point turn and its potential for danger. This was 16 years ago. It's a massively worrying traffic issue, and visitors have less awareness than residents of the dangers associated with turning involving car reversal at this treacherous school spot. Airbnb use, including visitor, cleaning and laundry vehicles, will add to this existing problem, which frankly needs action regardless. Our former experience of proximate Airbnb involves 9 Kane Street. Our rear garden has a 28-metre boundary, all of it completely overlooked by 7 and 9 Kane Street at significant elevations above us. When 9 Kane Street operated as short-term accommodation, we endured beer cans lobbed into our garden and onto our daughter's trampoline, and we witnessed Airbnb visitors vomiting off their balcony. With regard to the current request, in 2004, 7 Kane Street had a deck and dormer window added without application to council, and we found our privacy completely compromised as people on the deck, which extends right to our boundary, were visible from mid-shin, almost as if standing on top of the fence. The then owner admitted the problem, agreeing to fence extensions, which helped somewhat. In spite of this, the new owners of 18 months shared with us significant concerns about their own privacy, and they've added flimsy further extensions to this fence for this reason. At no point during these discussions did they divulge intent to convert to whole house short-term accommodation or give any advance notice to a single neighbour. Further, their application dishonestly states the number of vehicles they own, stressing positive impact to street amenity as a result, clearly in order to optimise their position. Following this, we're not hopeful of open discussion with them, if required, regarding problem Airbnb visitors. Further, we must point out that the onus shouldn't be on local residents to retrospectively deal with visitor problems via a visitor accommodation management plan. This presentation is supported by other respondents who were unable to attend. The impact on our tight little street community, most of whom are owners of 20+ years, will be considerable if this 2-room home converts to constantly changing visitors. Drew and I are scarred enough by earlier Airbnb experience here to have had a real estate valuation in the last few days, as we're considering whether we can remain in our much-loved home of 21 years if we're abutted by another Airbnb. This is the 4th home in a street of 10 houses to potentially operate as Airbnb in a neighbourhood from which each of us travel daily, seeing the soup and the mobile laundry vans further down Goulburn Street at the public housing complex. The poignancy of this in the current Airbnb climate cannot be ignored. Please consider refusing this application, bearing in mind genuine distress to residents, parking and access problems, and actual increased traffic danger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you stay there, I'll open it to the committee for questions. Thank you, and welcome Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you for your representation or deputation. You say there's four out of the 10 homes in the street are already short-stay accommodation. Is there an accumulative impact already from those 4? Can you describe it?
They have been Airbnb at different times. Number 7 Kane Street, I believe, isn't operating at this moment, and number 9 Kane Street isn't operating at this moment, but they both have previously. And number 16 Kane Street, I believe, is exempt but can run as Airbnb.
But number 16 is a part home, not a whole home.
Yep.
And 7 and 9 are whole home.
No, they're also part when the owners are away.
Okay, so the one we're referring to, is that a full-time Airbnb?
The current application is whole home, yeah, full-time Airbnb.
Thank you.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 questions. Question number 1. You mentioned about beer cans and vomiting, etc. Have you made any complaints to the council or any other authorities with regards to this?
This was some years ago, and we were not aware of process, and for the sake of neighbourhood peace, we didn't know who to complain to apart from mentioning it directly to the owners.
And the second question through you, Chair, you mentioned about the management plan. Would you be happy if there was a management plan for this to go ahead?
Absolutely not in our case, because, as I said, it's a retrospective situation. We have to witness problems and then call them out. So it impacts on us regardless if there are problems.
Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Chair. And just a couple, and that last question kind of answers one that I was going to ask, which was just your comment about the onus being on you with the management plan. Is that what you were referring to, about there needing to be an issue first and you then to respond to it?
Well, a visitor management plan is there hopefully for people to adhere to, but they don't necessarily do so, and then we have to call the problem. So we can live in the hope that the plan works, but we can't know that it actually will.
And the instances in the past of bad behaviour in the Airbnbs, is that limited to, I know you talk about multiple properties in the street?
It's limited to 9 Kane Street,
Okay.
which is the one that most affected us, being right across our rear boundary and at significant elevation.
Okay, so the other short stay listings that popped up around the street, they didn't all have that same sort of behaviour issue, is it?
I can't answer that because we're not as proximate.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, okay, fair enough.
Any further questions?
Yes.
Lord Mayor.
Thanks for your deputation. I'm just wondering, have you read the staff's report?
Yes.
And so I guess you understand that the planning directive about visitor accommodation doesn't apply at all in this case, because it's less than 100 square metres.
Which is deeply shocking to us. Deeply shocking.
Yeah, and so it's totally reliant on all the issues around neighbourhood amenity and those sort of things which we can consider when that planning directive is triggered. We sort of aren't given that power to do that now, but it does allow us to look at it because of these performance criteria, because there is no parking provided, and there are, I think, A to M different elements of the performance criteria. So do you feel like the report's kind of addressed those performance criteria? Like in terms of parking demand and...
Not at all. I think parking's an enormous problem that hasn't been addressed at all, because I think that possibly the planners don't have experience of the street. They don't have lived experience of it.
Okay. And so was there any information collected from you as a resident as part of putting the report together in terms of...
I provided similar details to my deputation, but more details, and I provided photographs from 2 separate days in the week, dated in the week of that report, of vehicles parked across garages and on yellow lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and so, there was 4 other representations provided, some of that info, or 3 others, yeah. Great, thank you.
And I just have a question, and thanks for your deputation. The other places that are used for short stay accommodation in your street, in your very short street, does parking become a problem with any of those currently, or
Not
when they're
currently,
active?
because this application is for 7 Kane Street, so they haven't been granted approval yet, and 9 Kane Street and 6 Kane Street haven't had visitors for a while. But when they had visitors, there was significant impact and a clear lack of awareness of garages, carports and yellow lines from visitors to those homes.
And just to make sure I'm clear on this, so previously when there were issues with the unsavoury activity that was occurring from the neighbour, you didn't put in a complaint because you didn't know of the complaints mechanism?
No idea.
Yep.
We also we were not even notified it was becoming an Airbnb at that time.
Right, okay. And I suspect that might be the same problem for a lot of people. Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, if you'd like to resume your seat, thank you very much. And I'll now call Ms Sue Hames. And again, you have 5 minutes to make your point. If there are different points, then if you can lead with those. Thank you.
Bear with me, there may be a little bit of repetition there.
Yep, thank you.
So I'm a property owner and resident of number 2 Kane Street, which is directly opposite from the applicant's property at 7 Kane Street. My concerns primarily relate to the parking situation in the vicinity of the property. The section, as Jane has said, the section of Kane Street between Goulburn Street and Amelia Street is quite narrow, but allows for 2-way traffic and limited on-street parking. I won't go through the numbers because you've been aware of them. as Jane said, there are several yellow lines that allow for more easy ingress and egress by on-site vehicles and are required due to both the narrowness of the road and, I must stress this, the awkward angles of a lot of these off-street driveways. Cane Street is often frequently used for parking by non-residents. Its proximity to the CBD makes the unrestricted parking spaces highly desirable for city workers who quickly snap them up for all-day parking. They often also occupy the restricted spaces, and I have regularly had to notify council officers of parking arrangements. With the upper part of Cane Street adjoining the Goulburn Street Primary School, the demands of parking are fairly high at school drop-off and pick-up times, as well as for regular Saturday morning children's sports. Frequently at these peak times, vehicles park over the yellow lines, making it very difficult for residents to get in and out. Also, on occasion, there are some Goulburn Street cars with resident parking parked in Cane Street for extended periods. In summary, the current parking situation is already often quite difficult both for residents and visitors. This is particularly so when tradespeople need to park on yellow lines. Mostly we work cooperatively when this happens and notify one another to minimise any inconvenience. This then leads to the potential impact for the proposed change of use. Some years ago, the owners of number 6 and number 9 Cane Street offered limited short-term accommodation through Airbnb whilst they were staying at their other properties. They no longer do this. My experience during this time was that on a number of occasions, visitor vehicles would park over my garage and the adjacent yellow line, making it impossible for me to take my car out. I particularly remember one Sunday morning when I had an emergency situation requiring me to urgently take my injured cat to the vet. Someone that was staying at number 9 had parked over my garage, but I couldn't raise them as they had gone out of the house, so I was unable to use my car. It was a disaster. It is exactly the sort of situation that can easily arise when you already have tight parking constraints and many people, different people coming and going who don't understand or respect the parking needs of residents. The Planners and Engineers report is primarily concerned with the number of car parking spaces, but of equal importance to residents is this issue of vehicles parking over the yellow lines and impeding off-street parking. The planning recommendations attempt to address the parking issue through the requirement of a management plan to effect some guidance for visitor behaviour and discourage them from bringing no more vehicles than is necessary. It also recommends the provision of a contact for residents to respond to in the event of egregious behaviour by visitors. The proposed planning recommendations are deficient in a number of ways. Firstly, they do not address visitor behaviour in relation to the parking over the yellow lines. Many Tasmanian drivers do not understand or adhere to yellow lines, and mainland or overseas drivers understand even less. Enforcement of the proposed visitor management mitigation measures will be pretty much non-existent, I believe. Residents theoretically would have the ability to ring a number that may or may not be contactable at the time required. This contact may in turn ring the visitor who may or may not be contactable. In the case of a parking infringement, a visitor may be away for a whole day before they come to move the car. This possibility is very real. One memorable occasion, I had a car parked over my garage one Sunday when no council officers were available. On my contacting the police, they were unable to contact the owner of the vehicle and were unable to have the car towed away immediately. Subsequently, I was not able to use my car all day until the owner eventually came back. As you can see, the parking situation in this part of Cane Street is already a tricky one, both in terms of the number of parking spaces available and the non-compliance with yellow line markings that are essential to us residents. Short-term visitors will often not have...
Would you like to finish up now, please? Thank you.
It is obvious that given the difficulties associated in effectively enforcing the proposed planning approval and recommendations, it would seem far better not to proceed with a change of the visitor use in the first place.
Okay, and I'll open it to the committee for questions. Any questions? Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair, through you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a question, what if the unit was used for tenancy? Won't that create the same problem with parking?
I think it has been used for tenancy until the current owners bought it, and we didn't have any problems because they understand the parking difficulties on the street. You know, everyone works together, and we all get on pretty well, really. So that's the big difference, is that residents understand the issues and comply, whether they're owners or tenants or whatever. It's the short-term parkers that are really probably unfamiliar with the yellow light situation. Even a lot of Tasmanian residents, that drivers that use the street either don't see the yellow lines or think, oh, I'll be right, I'll get away with it, sort of thing.
Okay. So any further questions? No further questions. Thank you. If you'd like to resume your seat. Thank you very much. And we now have the applicants, Ms Kathleen Saul and Peter Nsabuga.
Hi, yes. Unfortunately, Peter couldn't attend.
Okay. All right. If you'd like to take a
Thank
seat,
you.
and if you can answer some of the questions that were raised, and you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, of course. I just appreciate so it's Peter. Yeah, we both understand the sensitive nature of this application and how it can be because our neighbours present, and I'm sure other people all throughout Hobart and most of Australia. But as we have highlighted, this is a very small cottage. And when we did purchase the cottage in December 2020 and moved in early February, I think it is, 2021, we had all intention to stay permanent long term and hopefully to make it slightly bigger. But as you could imagine, the difficulty trying to find a builder to do anything in Hobart and the size constraints of being 100 square metres of land made that quite difficult. So, and as I think time went on, we realised we can't live in it, it's too small. We both work from home a number of days a week. So we have made the decision to put this application in, and we did not think that we had to consult our neighbours to do this, as we were in our right just to provide information. I believe we're in the guidelines, and as I think what I have provided. I'm not sure if you've all seen the photographs I've provided of the street and the pictures within the property as well, just to highlight some of the concerns our neighbours had, just to help mitigate those. And it is unfortunate that both neighbours have had negative experiences with number 9 and number 6 in the past. However, it can't be determined that guests of 7 Kane Street in the future will have the same type of issues. It's a different type of property. Number 9 Kane Street, I believe, is a 3-bedroom home. Number 6 is a 2 or 3 bedroom home as well. So the guests would be of a greater number, whereas currently it's 2 of us living there. We would only allow 2 people to live there. We will not be offering any parking whatsoever. And as the engineering report said, that, you know, Kane Street is a small street. However, there's very few houses. There's 14 houses in total, including each on the corner. 11 of them all have off-street parking. There is parking available along one side of the street, easy configurations. There has been issues with people being busier than it normally would be, and that's because 9 Kane Street since March have been undergoing a renovation. And part of that renovation is their driveways being dug up. So deliveries there have had to park as close as possible to deliver bricks, roofing materials, fixtures and fittings. So because of health and safety, they cannot park too far away, so they have to stop momentarily to make those deliveries. And I do believe that one of the photographs I know is of a delivery made to number 9 Kane Street, and that is unfortunate. They shouldn't have parked on the yellow line, but they did, and that was a temporary measure, and that does not determine that a short-term resident is going to park in that manner either. We will be living nearby, that is our plan, as our neighbours know, and we will be managing it ourselves. We will strongly discourage any guests who do communicate with us that if they do want to bring a car, we'll encourage them to find alternative accommodation. If they can't do that, there are long-term and short-term parking options where we can provide information for. If their guests are wanting to stay for a month or so, there are monthly parking permits available not too far away from where we are. As you know, we're quite central, so we are also I think about a 14-minute walk to the nearest Sky bus service on Collins Street. There is a local bus number 540 that's on Forest Road, that's less than 200 metres away. There are pictures of, and I understand the works that were carried out by the previous owners, we were not aware of that. When we did move in, we did put some extra screening on, which was along the deck. Have you all seen the photographs of the...
Mine this afternoon at about half an hour ago. So,
oh, you did, yeah. Yeah, so...
But we can ask you questions
Yeah,
in a
of
moment,
course,
but
yeah,
your time is almost up. So if you want to just summarise.
You know, I appreciate our neighbours' concerns, but we are going to mitigate everything with a management plan. The incidences that were brought up by our neighbours, they sound like they were one-off many years ago by local neighbours running Airbnb without management plans in place that have second properties in Bruny Island and out in Campania, so not close by at all. And I don't want one bad experience to impact on our application when it can't be ascertained if that would be the same for us.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'll open it to the committee for questions. Any questions? Lord Mayor?
So thanks for your deputation. All of this hassle that you're going through, would you have to do that if you were just going with a long-term tenant?
The reason why we've decided not to is that we feel if we can't live in it long-term, and we were told by, I believe it was Jane and a couple of other neighbours, that the previous owners did try to rent it out long-term and they only lasted a couple of months before moving out. I just don't feel that it is the type of property. As you can see from the pictures, it's 1800s. It's a one-bedroom, very small cottage, low ceilings. My Peter is 5'11", and he just skims through upstairs, to give you an indication. So it's very limited, and that is the main reason why we just don't feel we would be able to find a suitable tenant long-term.
But you haven't actually yet put it onto the, that's not something you tried and then failed with that and then,
No, but we need to. Unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can leave a property empty like some of the other neighbouring houses. We would need to maintain the mortgage. So if we can't rent it out long term, we need the option to be able to rent it out short term too, just to secure our finances.
Further questions? Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just one clarification. You know, in the report, it stated that there are 3 on-street car parking spaces available. Is that true? I just want some clarification.
On Kane Street, parking is along one side. There's approximately in total 20 to 24 spots available, depending on car size. It's a combination of authorised parking permits, Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5:30, with a 2-hour for visitors to be able to park momentarily. Plus there is an area, which I believe that's what those 3 spaces are, that are free all-day spaces on Kane Street, and they are kind of diagonally opposite number 7. Out there, they're directly outside number 6. That's what those 3 refer to, but there are more parking options on Kane Street, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
You said that the last time it was rented out, the tenants didn't stay very long. How long ago was that?
Well, this was the previous owners, and this is the information, second-hand information we were given by our neighbours.
Okay, but that was probably pre-COVID and
Likely, yes. So where now there's more of a need to work from home, especially, and there's even less space for that.
and also pre-housing disaster.
What do you mean by housing disaster?
Well, the shortage of housing in Tasmania,
yes.
where we have, no, I'm just looking at the figure now, nearly 10% of our homes are short stay accommodation.
Right.
So you're probably talking about a period before that.
I know the
Well
previous
before that.
owners bought it maybe 18 years prior to us buying it, so within that time period.
But more than likely it was rented out.
Potentially, and I know it was probably used as a second home for them. I believe they had a property outside of Hobart as well, like a lot of locals do, have multiple city homes and outside homes. But on that note as well, may I just add, this is a very small one-bedroom cottage. It's not going to, having it on the long term is not going to have an impact on the housing affordability, on the rental market. We have been a part of that when we first moved to Hobart and completely understand that. I did highlight as well, within a very short space from our property, there are empty homes, large empty family homes. And maybe something like that might have a bigger impact if that was obviously not for today, but for another agenda, that is likely to help. Yeah.
Further questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Alderman Briscoe?
Thank you. So I must have missed just at the start of it. It is your home at the present, or you?
Yes, it is correct, yes.
So you have purchased or moving
Yes,
somewhere?
we purchased it in December 2020, and Peter and I have lived there continuously since then.
But
Yes.
you've purchased. You are intending to move out, are you?
Well, yes. Only, unfortunately, we do love the area. It's just with work and with life, we're struggling with the space. So that is why we are here today.
All right. And just a final question, because I have been a nearby resident, so I know this street very well. Yeah. It's a nice way to get from Galwinter Street to Forest Road. The resident parking permit scheme doesn't affect, is not, the 2-hour zones are not there. So is there any 2-hour zones there?
They've got the authorised residents with the 2 hours.
Yes, 2
on
hours
the
for
same,
everyone else. Yes.
for everyone else, yes.
But there's no sort of all-day parking available for...
Yes, there is.
There is as well.
There is for non-residents. That's what the 3 approximate car size dependent, the 3 spots are directly kind of diagonally across the road from 7 Kane Street.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah.
Harvey?
So when you lived there, how many cars did you have?
Well, I have 1 car. Peter is learning to drive, and he has a car as well.
So while you were living there, you had 2 cars?
Yes, 1 parking permit.
Yep. And how did you find parking in the street?
No issue. No issue. We did, before moving in, that was I have to say, I did query not having off-street parking, especially coming from Queensland with hailstorm damage, no cover, but there's been no challenges at all.
And where are you currently living?
I currently live in 7 Kane Street.
Okay.
Yes. We currently reside there right now while we are looking for alternative larger accommodation.
Okay, so if there are no further questions, if you'd like to take your seat again, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
I'll open the item for discussion.
just a question first, Chair. Yeah, thank you. I still am a little confused about, is the whole street to our parking, or obviously if you've got a resident parking scheme, you can stay there the whole day. I'm not...
Through you, Chair, my understanding is that there are a number of unlimited time restricted places, but the anecdotal evidence is that they get used by commuters.
Oh, yeah, if there is, people soon find them, yes, but I thought that it would all be 2-hour zones there, but obviously it's not. Okay, thanks.
All right, so,
Good
Lord Mayor.
question. Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of these, it is a very tricky one, obviously, and this is the this is the challenge we've got with the visitor accommodation rules, and trying to regulate effectively something that's having a big impact on the housing market, but having to do that through parking issues. It is pretty challenging, but I guess my question really relates to the community that are concerned about this need to have a sense that there's been, a proper assessment that's based on data and evidence, and a really deep consideration of the performance criteria. Because if we were just going with the acceptable solution, it's very clear it doesn't comply with the acceptable solution. So that's the black and white. It doesn't comply, it should be refused. Therefore, we go to the performance criteria, and there is, I think it's items A to K or even further. And some of those aren't relevant. The last couple obviously are about cultural heritage code, and if there'd been some impact on that, which I don't think it would, or significant trees. But A to K, there's quite a lot of considerations there, and I haven't really seen any information to persuade me objectively from the staff's perspective. I mean, I've heard both sides of the story, but I have no data or information about any of the things that we're meant to actually consider. Car parking demand, availability on and off street. The public transport obviously is clear, but also the all this performance criteria, and really all I've got is this sort of wrap-up statement at the end, which is that, well, it's a problem now, so it's not going to be any worse, but that's not really what I can assess it on, because there's no actual presentation of whether it is or isn't a problem from the staff, just a sort of, just an assertion about it. And then it does also, it just worries me a little bit that it says, the availability of parking would likely be communicated and managed proactively. I guess, again, I don't really have the information on what we're doing to, require that, let alone enforce it. It's just, again, a hope that everyone will sort it out and we'll muddle along and it'll be okay. So 6.7.5, I guess, is not enough to then come to the conclusion in 6.7.6 that the proposal complies with the performance criterion. Nothing's been presented to me that persuades me of that. So that's my concern, and I think given the community's expectation that we're regulating this form of change of use of property that is quite significant in terms of its impact on the city and the housing market, I just think we need to be given some more in-depth information to show that it definitely does meet the performance criteria, and that's not there yet. So that's.
So, Lord Mayor, do you have a question to? No, sorry, that was just. Or do you have
well, just why there isn't more detail.
Sophie?
Through you, Chair. The assessment that's been done by the officers is based on the fact that there's a one car space deficiency, and while it's not specifically articulated in the report, matters like the performance criteria call up, for example, availability of public transport, for example, or the ability to walk close to town, are all matters that would have been taken into account by the assessing officer. And given the low expectation of parking from this sort of proposal, and given the fact that it would be replacing a use which has similar parking demands, overall their view was that the performance criteria was satisfied.
But doesn't the performance criteria, it has to have in regard to all of the following?
Absolutely. And it does, that analysis.
So every single one of those has been addressed?
Well, I can see, from your point of view, I can see why it's not specifically line by line addressed. They do have a separate entry in our assessment system which goes through each line item, but in circumstances where there's less of analysis to do, for example, where there's a one space shortage, that analysis does tend to be a little bit more summarised, I guess, to where there's not as much detail to go into.
Can I just put a request on notice? Can I just, out of curiosity, just to see how we do manage these and assess them. Can I actually see that working document?
Thank you. Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. I am, again, I'm looking at the criteria that's been given to us, clause 661P1, and has already been mentioned. The important point for me is that the car parking spaces must be sufficient to meet the reasonable needs of the users. Now, that reasonable need is an objective test for me. And the objective test does not, in here in the report, has given me evidence as such to support this. Therefore, I will move a motion for refusal under clause 661P1 and A1. Thank you.
So we have a motion before us now. Alderman Briscoe?
Look, I would support that motion. I would have moved that motion, but my colleague has got in before me, but that's okay. It's still the motion's on the books. I agree with the analysis that it doesn't meet the performance clause of 611.1 P1, and basically A and B is the ones that I would say it failed on. It's always my view that we should have density limits for short stay accommodation. And interesting, this street, from the evidence was given by the representatives, a big issue is empty houses there as well. I mean, if we approached empty houses that are not being occupied or not available for rental, that's an issue that's probably bigger than the short stay accommodation, but it appears that this one doesn't meet, or it does, in my view, doesn't meet the car parking requirements and on-street parking. So all I can say is, as I'm very, very familiar with this street, and I'm very familiar with the area, there is a shortage of parking for residents. When I visit friends in Forest Road, and I've still got a few left, I think after all the years I've been on council, finding a car spot close by is difficult, even at weekends, so let alone during the commuter time. So I'm happy to support a refusal on this one due to those things I mentioned.
Thank you. Alderman Barakis?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And look, I know there's been a lot of talk about the housing market and the effects on that, and as is the case when we debate development applications for new housing, the housing supply isn't a accessible criteria here. I would say normally when these items come up and these short stay items come up and they're recommended for approval, I'm the one that will sit here and rail at everybody for us not engaging in Groundhog Day and going through the same steps and refusing for the same reasons, and it ultimately coming back to us in appeals. But I think this could very well be one of those cases where I think there is a reasonable case to make on the parking issue. I'm yet to be convinced that, broadly speaking, the assumption that short stay accommodation equals a greater load on parking is correct. I actually believe it's probably the other way around, because not everybody that travels into Hobart and stays in an accommodation is necessarily going to be also renting a car. However, the issue is not so much about the actual number of cars that are going to be added to the street. I'm more concerned with the fact that the reasonable comment that was made by one of the representatives, that people that are not familiar with the street are the ones more likely to be parking where they shouldn't be, parking in ways where they don't realise is causing trouble for other people. As the debate's been going, I actually went on Google Maps and went onto Street View, and just across the road from the house in question is a car parked over yellow lines on Google Street View. So as far as, I know when we have these debates and there's I sometimes get frustrated by the amount of speculation as to the impacts things will have, the impacts these applications will have on noise, or the impacts they'll have on parking. But when there are, I think, reasonable, or there's good reason to expect that these speculations come with some merit, I think we look into that. I'm not necessarily convinced one way or another, so I might just sit back and continue to listen on this one, but I think this is one where there is merit either way on the decisions on this tonight.
Further discussion?
I'll ask a very quick question, sorry. This was
Lord
a quick
Mayor?
question. I'm just wondering, when else would this be triggered? Not like this on-site car parking must be sufficient to meet the reasonable needs of users. Is it just when there's a change of use? Or would it have been this situation, would this have been considered if there was an extension or other work? Or is this really, is this performance criteria only related to applications for change of use?
Through you, Chair, this is a use standard, so a change of use requires consideration of the number of parking spaces which the use requires.
Yeah.
So this code applies to all use and development.
Right. But if it was an extension or something, this wouldn't necessarily be triggered?
Through you, Chair, well, if there's no change proposed to the use, it's unlikely that it would be an issue under here. Potentially there might be deficiency existing, and we would normally say that would carry forward under the new application.
But if this was being changed to commercial or something, it would, the same thing would, not visitor accommodation, just a home office or something, or an office.
Through you, Chair, other uses that would definitely be called up and be considered under this provision.
Look, I feel that there is grounds for concern for neighbours and the impact on residential amenity relating to this. But I suppose the planners are caught between a rock and a hard place, and I just find the clause 6.7.5, which is around those provisions that we're considering tonight. So based on consideration of the above applicable performance criteria, the lack of any parking provision may be accepted under a performance-based solution due to the existing deficiency associated with the existing use of land. Furthermore, the lack of available parking would likely be communicated and managed proactively, thus curtailing any significant issues associated with visitor demands. Now, we've heard from two representors, we've had two other representations, and I'll just note also an email that was sent to me a couple of days ago, which I only just found, but it says here that we believe that Council had passed a policy on no new short stay accommodation, whole house for residential areas. Obviously that's still in train, but then it appears that applications are being waved through by Council staff. Now I've said that no, it's not a matter of Council staff waving these through, it's considering against deficient legislation, unfortunately. This resident of Cane Street goes on to say, as a resident of this small street, I want to have some relationship with my neighbours. If the owners want to rent their property, there are many people looking for rental accommodation in Hobart. I can only assume that the push for short-term rental status is to make more money or to sell the property with this rental status to an investor. The latter would be a very poor outcome for us. So what we're hearing from these representors is a similar pattern to what we're hearing elsewhere, that there is concern that their residential amenity will be lost, and particularly around those parking issues. But there are other toing and froing of not only people who are there for a short time, but also potentially those cleaners and other service vehicles. So I think that's what we have before us. We have a motion from Councillor Dutta, so if there's no further discussion, I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? So the motion is carried unanimously. That will now go to full council, which is on next Monday.
Just as a clarification, it's going to full council because it's against the officer's recommendation. Because
yes, because right. It's for refusal, and all refusals go to full council.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we move now to item 8.1, which is Cananya Mount Wellington Cultural Landscape Precinct, and we will hear from Mr. Bernard Lloyd, who is from Enshrine, and I think there might be others with you. Oh, right. Oh, Catherine, sorry. Okay, so you're Catherine?
Yes.
Oh,
there,
hello.
There is 4 of us here, so if there are some questions that I'm not so sure about on the heritage issues, some of them might come forward to answer those.
Okay, yep, great. Okay, so you have 5 minutes to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity tonight to address you and to give you a bit more information regarding Enshrine and our request to gain landholder consent for a planning scheme amendment. So first off, I'll tell you just what Enshrine is. It's basically an informal group of Hobartians who all love Cunanny Mount Wellington, and we value it in very many ways. We come from a range of different backgrounds and we have a variety of skills and expertise. You can find out more about us on our website. That website is listthemountain.com. So our aim is to gain better recognition of the landscape and cultural values of the mountain by achieving long-term listing of the mountain face at all levels of government and eventually listing on the National Heritage Register. Cunanny Mount Wellington was once listed at this national level, but when the Register of the National Estate was closed in 2007, it lost this listing, and recognition at this level has not been reinstated under the EPBC Act, or indeed at either local or state level. So we believe this is an oversight that is long overdue to be remedied. To achieve such the cultural landscape precinct listing that we are aiming for, the advice that's been given to us suggests that we first need to obtain listing at local and our state level. So why do we actually want to achieve such a listing? We want to achieve such a listing because we believe that Cunanny Mount Wellington is the single most iconic element in the landscape that tells you you are in Hobart. It is immediately linked to Hobart, and it gives Hobart its unique and compelling setting. It gives Hobartians a very special sense of place. From reading historical documents, this has always been the case and continues to be the case. It is a special place for our Aboriginal communities and for all of us, and it continues to be. Its importance to all of us needs to be recognised and protected more formally, and that is what we hope to achieve. The Wellington Park Management Plan and the Act under which it is written give good protection to the park's landscape and heritage values, and in a practical sense guides ongoing park management operations. But we believe that a wider recognition of the landscape and cultural values can be achieved by complementing the plan with heritage listings at a national level. Indeed, Section 533 of the Management Plan, relating to landscape and aesthetic values, recommends under Action 6 that an application for National Heritage listing be considered. So this precinct will align with and complement the management plan. We do not envision that any extra clauses or provisions in the planning scheme would be put into the scheme. The only thing we really want to do is to add a map highlighting the extent of the mountain cultural landscape precinct that we believe needs to be recognised. So putting a clear map in the Hobart planning scheme designating the eastern face of the mountain as a mountain cultural landscape precinct will provide clarity over the area of the park within Hobart City Council control and ownership that we believe is the most visually and culturally important part of the park. To initiate this process, we first need landowner consent. So the briefing tonight is the first formal step in that process, and there's many steps to come, and that is if we get permission to begin the rest of those steps. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I will attempt to answer them.
Thanks for your presentation. So I'll open it to the committee for questions. Any questions? Alderman Briscoe?
Yes, thank you. And I'm aware of a lot of background material because I've watched this project grow for over a couple of years, so well done. Is there any other proposals that you would have other than the cultural landscape precinct?
In relation for the Hobart City Council to?
Extension of it?
Yes, in relation to other council areas, yes, but for the Hobart City Council area, no.
Oh, right, okay. So just as in passing, I totally agree with your opening comments about it being the iconic part of the landscape of Hobart.
Further questions, comments? Councillor Harvey?
So how does this proposal, if fulfilled, affect the management of the mountain and council's roles and the Wellington Park Trust roles with regard to the mountain?
The guiding document that still really controls what both the Trust, our Hobart Council, in terms of their activities, is the management plan, and that will always continue to be the case. The existing planning scheme has a clause in it that says the management plan basically overrides anything in the scheme. All we see that this will do is really, it really is a step to actually achieve national listing. And we have to do that on the advice we've been given in order to get to those next steps. It gives clarity as regards where we believe the really important values, the cultural and landscape values of the mountain sit. At the moment, there is no, I mean, there's the whole landscape of the mountain, which is a very big area. But there's a lot of different elements on the mountain. There is a whole suite of different artifacts and specific places that have values, and they're quite varied. We believe that by actually defining boundaries around that, you actually give clarity around where we really want to ensure that any kind of activities, it's not saying they can't happen, but it's that those values are really considered in assessing the impact of any of those activities and uses. So it's to give clarity to everybody. And the example I would give is some years ago, I worked with the Tasman Council to actually, and it was in order to achieve World Heritage listing for Port Arthur, and I worked with them to actually designate an area in their planning scheme to actually just clarify where some of the clauses that already existed in the scheme would apply. And it was really just to give clarity to everybody, and it was a requirement of the World Heritage listing that we actually had a map and some clauses in the planning scheme, and that's a bit similar to what I see would be the case here.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a question with regards to the National Heritage listing. So what's the criteria, and after this step, what are the next steps in order to get to that?
That's a question I'm going to ask one of our other members who is a heritage expert to maybe clarify on. It's not an area that I have great expertise in. And if
Ms McGowan, would you like to come to the table, please? If you could speak into the microphone as well. Thank you.
Could you just repeat the question again?
The question that I have, because the national heritage listing was mentioned, and so my question is, what's the criteria to get there, and what are the steps required?
Well, the criteria for national heritage listing is a very high bar, and essentially, I guess, could be summarised as being that the place in question must be considered to be of heritage value to the nation, to the whole of Australia, as being such an important, iconic place. And of course, it would be up to the Australian Heritage Council to ultimately decide where their threshold lies and whether Mount Wellington, sort of meets their criteria or not. But we believe that it would. The steps to get there we have been advised, and it's also in their nomination information, is that they expect that places should already be recognised at local and state levels. So before it would be worthwhile drawing up a nomination to the National Heritage List, we need to get our ducks in a line, as they say. The bottom rung of that ladder is asking Hobart City Council, as the landowner of part of the area in question, for permission to ask for an amendment to the planning scheme so that the area can be recognised in the local planning scheme. We would also need then to approach the other local councils involved, which would be Glenorchy and Kingborough. We would then need to make a nomination to the state, to the state heritage list, and then ultimately draw up a nomination for the National Heritage listing. Ultimately, I mean, we have come up with a boundary that for our current request that is in keeping with the Hobart City Council's land for requesting landowner permission. And I guess we would see what other levels of government and the Australian Heritage Council, whether they would accept the entire area that we are thinking of, or whether they might want something smaller. Yeah, but I guess that's what that would be the process for obtaining National Heritage listing, and the benefits that would flow from it in terms of celebration of the mountain and the importance of the place, not only to Hobart, which we'd all know, but to the whole of the country and visitors who come here.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Lord Mayor?
Thank you. So it sounds like an exciting project, but a very long-term one. I'm just wondering, could you just proceed to the next level of the state listing just on the basis of the Hobart planning scheme amendment, or will you sort of do Hobart and then go through the process with Glenorchy and then go through the process with Kingborough, and then, I mean, what's your thinking about that sort of?
Well, we could,
most of the
yeah,
sites, do
we could review the steps, but at the moment, our current thought is to approach the other councils, assuming success with getting an amendment to the Hobart planning scheme, to then approach the other two councils and in similar vein, so that hopefully we would then have a more complete nomination to go forward, rather than ask for extensions to something that...
Questions?
Yeah, just another question, just maybe just around the time frame and the next steps. I mean, what would be your preferred sort of next steps in the process? The report talks about receiving and noting and waiting for some advice to come forward. Is that, I mean, what would you...
Well, I guess there's a fair bit of work involved, obviously, in doing the scheme amendment, and, you know, there's a whole lot of, I suppose, unknowns around, because we've got the planning provisions going through the commission and all of that. So we haven't tried to work out any specific timeframes, because a lot of that is outside of our control. And so we've just initiated this as a starting point, because without landholder consent, we can't really do anything more. So this is very much a first step. And if other opportunities come up that maybe we take a slightly different direction, that's fine. We'll be pretty flexible, but this is a step that we have at the moment. And so we're just going with that for now.
So if there are no further questions, I just have a query. Thank you very much for your deputation and presenting this to us. And I'm just curious. I mean, you're doing this in a voluntary capacity as a group with.
Everybody's
sounds like
voluntary.
You've got various pieces of expertise amongst your group.
Yes, everybody's just doing it in a volunteer capacity, just because we believe there's you know, we value the mountain and want to see it protected and maintained and recognised for a long term.
Have you got any other example as to, you know, this kind of approach?
Well, I think probably something that's fairly similar is the Queen's Domain in terms of the precinct that's over that, and the kind of clauses that are in the scheme around that is pretty much the same kind of uses and development. And this, we don't envisage that there would be any different clauses that we'd be putting in. We would literally just want to see the area recognised as a similar sort of precinct with a whole lot of varying values in terms of natural values, landscape values, cultural heritage values within that landscape.
And activities, I suppose that's,
Yes.
I think it's under an act, isn't it? Mm. Yes. All right, okay. Alderman Risco, you have another question?
No, just... I thought
okay. So if you'd like to take your seats again, thank you very much. And I'll open the item for discussion. Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I just had a quick Google search. I knew I had some involvement. Just to remind myself, 2015, a proposal came for me to get heritage listing, national heritage listing for the Pinnacle Road. And 2018, for the organ pipes, a joint motion between Councillor Reynolds and myself. Just for the organ pipes, and the officer report came back saying to get nomination as the World Heritage significance of the organ pipes, it would require assessment costing about $100,000. Now, whilst at that stage the council decided not to spend that amount, but this broader approach seems to me a much more a different way of approaching it, rather than doing individual things like the road or the organ pipes. It's doing the whole mountain as a cultural landscape, and I commend the group. Now, the group would have read the report saying that we can't make decisions because we're in caretaker mode, but in the new council, in a couple of months' time, then a decision would come before council whether to give landlord. But I'm hoping I'm about the table to put up my hand and support it, but we don't know. In the next few weeks we'll determine. So well done, and a lot of great work that I've seen on your website. Thank you.
Further discussion, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, Chair, look, I think I concur with the compliments given about the approach and huge amount of community effort. But I do think that I would like to see us, I guess, do our bit to acknowledge that community effort and show our support for the process, not necessarily the entire proposal, but the process by changing the recommendation, and I'm happy to move the recommendation, but with a couple of amendments, and that would be to basically refer it on immediately to the Parks, next available Parks Committee to consider, and then on to Council, because although the report notes that the GM, CEO, wants to get the Council's views, the Council will not be the decision maker. And I think years ago we had this debate about a whole range of matters, and I can't remember which ones they were, about, you know, who gives landlord consent, not on the use of the land, but on the landlord consent to lodge a development application. And I think we got Nick Heath organised to get some quite detailed legal advice, which basically said that, and I've just gone back to that advice, it said that only the GM can make a decision about consent to lodge a DA. The GM's powers to grant or refuse consent are quite broad, and if landowner consent is given, the councillors retain their role in assessing and determining whether the proposal ultimately goes ahead and full landlord consent is given, but it is totally the CEO or the GM's decision to grant the consent to proceed with the next step. So I see no reason, given we're in caretaker mode, for the process not to continue, because ultimately we're not decision makers in this process. We're just If it goes to Parks and then it goes on to Council, the CEO will listen to our views about it, but ultimately it's the CEO's decision. So I think we can keep it moving, and so I would suggest we add an amendment such as, and I'll just read something out, something like, and I can send this through, request that this matter be referred, so we've got the receiver note, keep that, and then add request that this matter be referred to the next Parks Committee for consideration, and then the following council meeting. Note that any council decision on this matter would only provide guidance to the CEO, who has a statutory obligation and power to approve, reject applications for consent to lodge planning applications on council land. So it's really just saying, let's keep the process moving. I don't think there's any reason for us just to sit on it. There's obviously a long way to go on this entire project. A lot of work's already been done, so I think, given we're not the decision maker. Yeah.
All right, so that is an amended recommendation. Perhaps I might just get some guidance from Ms Hogue, just in relation, or I'm not sure if it's Ms Hogue or Ms Abbey, just in relation to what needs to happen with this for it to go forward.
Thank you, Chair. I can provide the advice.
Thank you.
So we wouldn't be in a position, I don't think, to have a report for the next Committee of Parks and Recreation, because we are seeking some further information from the Enshrine Group. We had a meeting last Friday and went through in some detail as to what they will need to provide to get General Manager's consent. And so they're working on that at the moment. So I very much doubt that we'd be able to get it to that meeting. And the other thing that we're doing at the moment is seeking some legal advice just about how a planning scheme amendment, or if this were to go into the planning scheme, how that might work with the Wellington Park Management Plan. So we're seeking some further information in any event.
So just a question around that. So so we've had general managers' consent provided previously for other developments on the mountain. Does it really need to have all of that information before general managers' consent is provided?
Chair, it's to do with so at the moment, the way that the planning scheme amendment is drafted, it doesn't meet the requirements of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. So we actually need it reasonably, it's not all the background supporting reports and all of that, but we need to clearly see what the proposal is and how it would fit into the planning scheme, because there's no point in getting GMC and then finding out that we have to come back again because it's actually a different proposal. So a prime example, it makes statements, say, about Aboriginal heritage in what we've got drafted or before us at the moment, and under the requirements for planning schemes, you can't include. It's the criteria around what is a historic cultural heritage precinct. You can't include Aboriginal heritage. That's just one example. So we're waiting to get some further drafting back. And it is that broader, and I don't know the circumstances of what you might have had before you but it is quite clear to us that there is some ambiguity about how the heritage provisions work with the Wellington Park Management Plan.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I wonder if the Councillor Reynolds would be able to rejig her amendment, because I can understand the motivation. I share that we want to keep the process working. To me, it's going to be a long-term thing. What we've just heard what about noting as an amendment something like that, and encourage the officers to get that necessary further information so the application can be in the form that would be more readily accepted for landlord approval. That's essentially what you're asking us. You need more time, but if we just endorse that, you know, received and noted doesn't tell the community that we're interested in this proposal. It doesn't. So we just need that extra bit. Whether it comes before a Parks Committee or a Council Committee is immaterial to me, because getting that information right so it could be more successful when it's assessed. That's what we're doing. So I wonder if it's some change of your amendment, Councillor Reynolds?
Is it request that this matter be referred to the next appropriate committee meeting for consideration once the appropriate information has been received?
Yeah, once. So it might be 2 or 3 meetings down, but once. Yeah, I think that would...
Mayor?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yep.
I do think the second piece of advice, which is around whether it's going to work, is really, isn't that really up to the Commission to decide and the applicants? We don't have to get involved in that, or we don't have to get involved in that for the GM to basically start the process. That'll all come through the investigation process, won't it?
Oak?
Through you, Chair, I'm not convinced of that, but I'll take that on board and give it some thought. We do know, though, that what would happen if it legally can't work, we'll stall when we get to the Planning Commission. So we were trying to just get an idea, about what it might look like, because we know that will be a question that will be asked of us, how it works. Yep.
Okay, Dave, have you got... Yep, you've got that information. Any further comments? Alderman Barakis?
Can I just get what the motion is now read out? Because I had no issue with receiving and noting something, but it's moved beyond that.
Dave, can you read it out, please?
But we're not taking a position on anything tonight. Okay.
No, it's only receiving and noting, but moving it along, basically.
Yeah, no, I'm more comfortable with that. I don't know if I'll necessarily, once it's time to make a decision, be supportive of this, but given that it's just receiving and noting, I'm happy to...
Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, 2 points. First was the debate we had a number of years ago with regard to who can give landlord consent, and the advice said that it's not up to the councillors, it's up to the general manager. So I remember that clearly, that it's their role to give landlord consent, so I don't want to have another debate around that again. And second part, I've got a question with regard to a comment from Alderman Briscoe. Something about a motion to heritage list the road, was it?
Yes, in 2015.
Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at the article now that showed that was moved in 2014 by Bill Harvey. So
There was certainly one in 2015. So,
okay, I'm just curious.
I don't care who claims credit.
No, I'm just curious why you said 2015.
No, there is an article 2015 as well.
Okay. We both had the same. I was just a year ahead of you. That's okay.
And
About the motion before us?
Make sure, Chair, that we've got the motion wording, because I'm moving it, and I can send this, but see if everyone's happy with this, that we've got the receive and note, then request that this matter be referred to the next appropriate committee meeting for consideration once the appropriate information has been received from the applicants. And then I did want to add this bit about note that any council decision on this matter will be only providing guidance to the CEO, who has a statutory obligation and power to approve or reject applications for consent to lodge planning applications on council land, which is just what Councillor Harvey's saying.
Yeah, Councillor Reynolds, through the chair, there's also information that the officers are getting, not only Enshrine, isn't it? It's their legal advice. So it's not only, so you've got to include not only the information from Enshrine, but the officer advice.
Very complicated motion.
Information has been received.
Yeah, appropriate information.
Okay, and I'll send that to David.
Perhaps we need to read out.
Right, is everybody comfortable with what they hear before us?
We just read that again. Yeah,
So we've got the bit about the receive a note, and then request that this matter be referred to the next appropriate committee meeting for consideration once the appropriate information has been received, and then the bit about the note. Any council decision will be guidance to the CEO.
Right, Dave? Everybody okay with that now? Okay, and look, I'd just like to thank you again for your presentation. And obviously, we're just looking at landowner consent, but an important discussion which helps at least this committee and those who've attended today to understand what your approach is. So thank you for the work to date. So I'll put that motion as moved by the Lord Mayor. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Those against? It's all carried. Thank you. Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We have another deputation. So 7.1.5, which is 24 to 26 World Street, the flood mitigation works. And the applicant is here or online. Actually, we have to, oh yes, we've passed that, haven't we? So the applicant is online. So it's recommended for approval, subject to conditions. You wanted to add something, Mr. Terry? Or are you just here for questions if there are questions of you from the elected members? Might have to, are you on mute? I think you might be on mute.
Okay, sorry, I'm just here to support answer any questions from technical nature or from insurer or the flood engineer.
Okay. All right.
Address anything that might need clarified.
Okay, thanks for your patience. All right, so I'll open the item for discussion.
I'm happy to move the item.
Alderman Briscoe, thank you. Discussion? Doesn't look like there's too many questions for you.
That's fine.
All right, so if there are no questions, I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Thanks. Thanks for your patience. All right, so we'll go back to the items that we have before us, and we're up to 7.1.2, which is 215 Churchill Avenue, Sandy Bay, change of use to visit accommodation. Alderman Barakis, you want to move that?
I'm happy to move that, Chair, and sort of as I said in the previous item, this is one of those ones that I think is pretty cut and dry, and I think the answer as to how council should vote on this is pretty clear.
Just as a clarification, there was no representations for this through you, Chair?
There were no representations, that's right. Okay, so any further discussion?
I was just Googling it then to get another perspective on the property, and I noticed someone's poster on the fence. Very interesting. Anyway, from 2018. So
not yours, is it?
Not mine. No, no, not mine. Not yours either.
Can we know who? Is it possible?
It was the mover of the motion.
Okay, so we have this before us. Is there any discussion?
I'll just, this one, can I just ask, this one does trigger the 200 metres, does it? Or?
Through you, Chair, yes it does.
And again, I guess the question in my mind is to what extent we've really, I know it looks as though we've looked a little bit at the car parking, but all of the other discretions around privacy, residents, increase in noise, residential function, blah, 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 blah. I'm just not seeing the depth of analysis to give me confidence that we're actually making a decision based on evidence. So, and because this is our only way to regulate this growing problem, I'm feeling like I need a little bit more information. So, anyway. But maybe, as you say, this sort of...
Or are you... you wanted
Yeah, it's a comment really. But as you say, presumably there's detailed working notes behind these views that there's none of these are triggered. We go out and do our research.
Through you, Chair, the planner's report normally that would be the extent of it. There's no separate referral report, like I mentioned, with the development engineering team. So, you know, having said that, the planner was satisfied with the analysis that set out that the performance criteria was satisfied.
Do we know, Ms Obi, if this has been used at all for visitor accommodation previously?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so it's probably been a residential, either rental property or
that's my
permanent primary residence.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just it just says that, you know, it doesn't expect there to be any change. Like, there is a change of use, but it's basically just saying there won't be an expectation of any change to the strata scheme from, you know, different people coming and going, because it's similar to residential use. Well, you know, it's not. It is a change of use, but again, there's a lot of subjectiveness there, really, isn't there, without the evidence. But I guess that's what we've got at the moment in terms of the regulation. I'm still a bit confused about the strata schemes, because I thought you weren't allowed to have visitor accommodation in strata schemes.
Through you, Chair, this is a separate dwelling, not part of a strata scheme.
I think you might be going 7.1.3.
Oh, that's also Churchill Avenue. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So we're looking at page 39 of the agenda for the assessment for this one.
Oh, okay. So
I think I might have visited this fellow at his property for another neighbouring development some time ago in that back lane.
Through you, Chair, and that the additional restriction on strata allowing visitor accommodation use is a matter for the bylaws of the individual strata arrangements. So that's completely separate from any planning consideration we do.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. I would move a foreshadowed motion.
All right, thank you. All right, was there an application for the house next door that we'd considered, 213 Churchill Avenue, previously? I think there was. I think that was quite a controversial one, wasn't it?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I'm not sure. I haven't got the map open. It's either the one immediately next door or the one next to that. We proposed to have a second dwelling at the rear, but it was controversial because it had, I think it was 3 stories and a lot of bedrooms. And so the concern was that it was going to be used for not a single dwelling. Yeah.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Question in regards to the foreshadowed motion. Do we have reasons for refusal?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You want me to respond?
Yes, you might as well.
The reason for refusal is clause 3.1 EP1, because if you read that visitor accommodation must be compatible with the character and use of the area. There is one element of that, so that one element of that clause clearly states that it needs to be compatible with the character and area. Now, I am of the view that it is not, and then it says, and not cause unreasonable. So there are 2 elements there. One, it needs to be compatible with the character and use, which is my objection, and not cause unreasonable. So therefore, when you take these 2 elements, and the evidence provided to me does not convince me.
So we're just assuming that it is going to cause unreasonable harm?
Say that again.
Are we assuming that it is going to cause unreasonable harm to the area?
It's been assumed here on the contrary.
Go through the chair, please, rather than across the table.
Sorry, Chair.
Has that answered your question, Alderman Barakis?
In a sense.
Yep, thank you. All right, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Where is the evidence for we've heard legal argument. It appears appears, but we haven't heard evidence. We've got no representations at all. So we can't have evidence to the contrary. You're just describing a situation where, and this is one of those clear things, the only person who can appeal a decision for refusal is the applicant, because there's no representals against it. So we'll go to the tribunal. We won't be able to find a planner in town, maybe in Australia or the world, to actually support the legal argument that was being presented for the alternate motion, because there's no evidence, literally no evidence. And no one else will be able to put any evidence in because there's no representals. So I feel like it's just a question of wasting council resources. This is not an example like Cane Street, where there was plenty of evidence presented to us. So I'll be supporting, and it appears that we'll lose at this committee meeting, but I don't like the idea that no evidence is produced that is having any detrimental effect, because there's no representations, there's no evidence.
Lord Mayor?
Look, I understand what Alderman Briscoe is saying, but I just need to point out that this does not meet the acceptable solution for visitor accommodation. So let's start with that. The law says that visitor accommodation must not have a gross floor area of more than 200 square metres. Okay? This does.
Yep.
So on that very basic test, it doesn't meet the law. We then are meant to go through a process of looking at the performance criteria, which I will note has A, B, C, D, E and F. Obviously some of them aren't relevant, but what I haven't seen from our officers is any evidence either way, except for some general things about, it's a bit she'll be right, mate, rather than it does ask us to look at whether the scale is compatible with the surrounding character and uses within the area. It does ask us to retain the primary residential function of the area. We know these large houses in Sandy Bay become party houses, and they become a problem later. And you can say, why is it up to the neighbours to collect evidence? We're the regulator. We should be collecting the evidence and having a little bit more of a slightly more sceptical view than I pick up from this, which is just that we've got 2 paragraphs from the officers. And again, I would request that if we can see the working documenting that is being done, because it is up to us to collect the evidence, not to representals or neighbours. But I don't see the work that's been done to show me that something that fundamentally should be rejected because it doesn't meet the acceptable solution. I'm not seeing anyone prove to me why it does meet the performance criteria in terms of our regulation, not another officer, not another neighbour.
Yeah,
sorry.
So I take your point, and I take Alderman Briscoe's difference of opinion as well, and having the evidence either one way or the other is how we make our decisions. Any further discussion? Councillor Harvey?
Only to say, Chair, that the decision from the Planning Commission can't come soon enough.
I agree.
And I hope they're listening, because they really need to get on with it. So, but look, I'm really struggling to refuse this as well, because there was no representations from the neighbours. So tonight I'm going to support this one.
All right, so so if there's no further discussion, I mean, I see that this is, again, very subjective interpretation. So, yeah, I have great difficulty supporting any motion for approval, which you have moved, Alderman Baraka. So I'll put the motion for approval, subject to conditions. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? No. Show of hands. Those in favour?
Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Barakas and Councillor Harvey.
Those against?
Councillor Nutter, Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
Right, it's a tied vote, so it's lost. We now have the foreshadowed, or the your motion, Councillor Dutta, and I think everybody knows what grounds there are. I'll put that. Is there any further discussion? No further discussion. I think, again, we've heard this, so I'll put that. Those in favour? Aye. Those against?
No.
Show of hands. Those in favour?
Councillor Dutta, Deputy Lord Mayor and Lord Mayor.
And those against?
Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Brighters and Councillor Harvey.
So it's a tied vote. That will go to Council next Monday without a decision. And I think we've heard Groundhog Day so many times, Alderman Brighters, it probably doesn't add to any debate or discussion. But anyway, we'll go to the next one. 7.1.3, 7.1.31, 273 Churchill Avenue. So this is a stratum title.
I'm happy to move the recommendation, and like, would you believe, there's some unity, a unity ticket with Councillor Harvey. There's no representations here, so let's not have the argument again. Let's not have the discussion. Let's move. If it goes 3-3, let it be. It is similar. It's almost the same argument. So.
Further discussion.
To the quality
Thank you.
debate?
Yeah, nothing more to put with it.
The issue for me, unfortunately, here is with regards to PD6P2, and on that basis I would refuse, because it says that the visitor accommodation within a strata scheme must not cause an unreasonable loss of residential amenity, and then it goes through, and I am not satisfied with that. And alternatively, I will present the same argument. There are assumptions made, and therefore you can, if you turn it around, the same thing happens. Assumptions are made. But the law itself is very clear. It's the interpretation of what must means and the loss of amenity. There may be degrees, but on that degree we use our discretion to say, okay, I would not go along with that. And so therefore I move an alternative that to be refused under PD6P2.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion?
Just to ask about, if I can ask, just to clarify from what Councillor Dutta is saying. So within a strata scheme, it's not allowed visitor accommodation. Did you say it's you still require the body corporate's approval?
Through your chair, that's entirely dependent on the body corporate rules, or the body corporate bylaws. So I don't have the information relating to those bylaws for this property.
You don't need proof of that to say it won't. Do you need proof of whether they've got the body corporate or not to say whether it's going to impact?
Through your chair, we just don't.
To.
We're not required to consider that, and we don't. We're not usually not provided with that information. If it is a concern in some cases, then members of the body corporate might raise it through representations. That obviously hasn't happened here.
All right, so we have Alderman Briscoe's motion. If there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion for approval. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? No. Show of hands. Those in favour?
Alderman Briscoe, Councillor Harvey and Alderman Brighters.
Those against?
Councillor Dutta, Deputy Lord Mayor and Lord Mayor.
So the motion is lost. It's tied. Councillor Dutta, can I put your motion now?
Please.
Okay.
Could I just repeat, Chair, Councillor Harvey's saying that amendment should be considered as soon as possible. We won't have this silly situation that we have. So I endorse what Councillor Harvey said earlier.
Thank you. So I'll put the motion for refusal. Those in favour? Aye. Those against?
No.
Show of hands. Those in favour?
Councillor Dutta, Deputy Lord Mayor and Lord Mayor.
And those against?
Alderman Briscoe, Alderman Brighters.
So that will go as is to full council next Monday. Item 7.1.4, which is 16 Wayne Avenue, Sandy Bay, and adjacent road reserve. So this is over council land as to why we bring it. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Discussion? No discussion. I put that. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. We now go to reports 8.2, that's monthly building stats. Barakis, thank you. Right. All right. No discussion. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. 8.3 is the planning statistics. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Any discussion? No discussion. I'll put that. Those in favour? Those against? Items carried. The advertising reports, 8.4. Ms Abey.
Thank you, Chair. The most exciting items aren't actually on this list. We've got, you've probably already seen in the news this week, 1 Queen's Walk, additional social housing, two additional towers in addition to the existing 3, and there's also a social housing project at 71A Letitia Street, which will, I think it has already been advertised. So, and we also have received another application. We've just had general manager consent for that one, so the government's making progress with the the other one is on Newtown Road.
Oh, see, right.
So those will probably come to us, will they?
Yes, Queen's Walk definitely will. Letitia Street?
They will.
Before this present council?
Ooh, could do, possibly.
That'd be good.
Newtown Road, which number is that?
73A.
When's that?
Yep.
It's the old tennis courts that are on the corner of Newtown Road and I can't remember the other street, Sunvale or something like that. Yeah, in behind, sort of an internal lot. Yep.
That's not the state government, is it? Is that Catholic there or Evolve? That's them. Yeah.
Evolve, I think.
Well, Seneca Evolve Bills for
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all the same. And I was familiar with that when I was still in Minister Ferguson's office.
And I note that the 66 Burnett Street, which is behind, we all know where that is, partial change of use to visitor accommodation. How is that just one apartment or 20? Or how many do we know? You could perhaps find that out.
I might have to take that one on notice, Chair.
Thank you, because I think we had a certain amount of service departments versus like a shorter stay rather than short stay, like versus individual apartments. Right, I think Councillor Harvey, you might have moved this.
Maybe, I might have.
All right, I'll put that.
I accept I moved it.
Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Delegated decision report. Alderman Barakis, thank you. I've got a few of those on there. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. Item 9.1 and 2 is responses to questions without notice.
I'll move all of them.
Councillor Dutta, thanks. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Items carried. And response, have we got questions without notice?
Ask them, are we? No.
Oh, we can't ask them. Oh, okay, yep. All right, I was wondering why that was there.
We can ask them, but...
Caretaker role. So can I have somebody move that we go into close, please? Alderman Barakis, thank you. I think I'll put that. Those in favour, those against, and I thank anybody who's still watching. Good night.